Before we start the show, I want to tell you about Serve HQ. Every church leader knows that having trained and engaged volunteers is essential to successfully accomplishing your mission. But if you're like most leaders, you also know how tricky it can be to onboard and equip your team. What if there was a resource to make it easier? Well, let me introduce you to Serve HQ. Serve HQ is simple video training courses that help you equip volunteers and develop leaders. You can create your own training or use their video library. You can even automate next steps to onboard new people quickly. Check it out at servehq.church, and the link is in the show notes. That's servehq.church.
My pain has been one of the greatest teachers of my life. It truly has been one of the greatest teachers of my life, and it's opened my eyes to see everything in a new way. The way I interact with other people, it's like I had no idea that there were people walking around the grocery store, sitting on the sidelines of the soccer field that had unseen pain. When you become the person with the unseen pain, you realize that everybody's walking around carrying something. And oftentimes you can't see it. It's like the person that's yelling at the cash person at the cash register at the grocery store, or the person that's driving crazy on the freeway. Like, we truly have no idea what anybody else is going through. But when we're handed our own prescription of pain, it really changes the way that we extend grace to other people.
Well, hello, my friends. Welcome to Word Made Digital. I'm your host, Joanna LaFleur. This is Season 9, Episode 3. We have today a really interesting guest. It's Kayla Stoecklein, and you may have heard of her because, her story and her husband's story was in the news. So thank you so much to our sponsors for making this episode possible. Serve HQ, train your ministry volunteers, leaders, and new members online fast and easy with Serve HQ. And then Compassion Canada, lifting children from poverty in Jesus' name, and Scripture Untangled. If you like podcasts, you're going to want to check out this new podcast. More from our sponsors later, but for now, let me tell you about Kayla Stoecklein. She became an unexpected widow in August 2018 when her husband Andrew, the pastor of their large megachurch in California, he died by suicide. And with 3 young boys also grieving and a heart full of pain, full of grief, it became her mission to bring hope and help to others who faced unexpected hardships. So this is an important conversation. We're talking about mental health today. We're talking about suicide today, and we're talking about hope on the other side of it. I want you to lean in and listen to Kayla's insights, what she has to share from her own experience. And if this episode might help someone in your life, I encourage you to share it with them. Kayla Stoecklein, welcome to Word Made Digital. It's really an honor to have you on the podcast.
I'm so grateful to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
I mean, we got to go backwards before we can go forward. So maybe let's just start let's start in the present. Where do you live, and what's your life look like today?
Yeah, I'm in Southern California. I'm in a small beach town called San Clemente, right by the ocean. It is like the dream place to raise kids, 75 degrees and sunny year round. And I'm mostly at the skate park and at the beach. I have 3 little boys. They're 6, 8, and almost 10 years old. And so my days are full and busy. I feel like time is just flying by. I'm raising them on my own. I'm a single mom. I write books. I've written a couple books. I've got another book coming out in September called Rebuilding Beautiful. So in the little bits of time while they're at school, I'm writing and speaking and sharing and just taking it one day at a time.
Yeah. Well, okay, then let's go backwards a little bit so that we can give some context to people. Some people may know you by your name or by your face because your family story really became like a national or even international story as the Christian community, grieved with you over the loss of your husband. So can you go back and tell us a little bit about that part of your story? And then we'd also love to hear, what Andrew was like, but we'll get to that next.
Perfect. Yes. So over 4 years ago, I was living the life of my dreams, like really, truly had everything I could have ever imagined. I was married
Mm.
to handsome, successful stud. He was the lead pastor of our church, a thriving, growing, large mega church in Southern California. And I loved being a pastor's wife. I loved being sitting in the front row on Sunday mornings and supporting him. And I would go and get him lunch and bring it back to his office. It was my world. He was my world. His identity was my identity. And I was a stay-at-home mom with our 3 boys, and I loved that too. I was finding meaning and purpose in that, and just loved my life. We were living in a beautiful home. I had the beautiful mom car, like all the things. I had it. I loved it. It was amazing. If you would have asked me what my life would have looked like 30 years down the road, I could have confidently told you exactly what I thought my life was going to look like. And then
you were like quite literally living the dream, as we're going to talk about dreams and the future. Like that was the dream.
Yep.
You were in it.
Yep. Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Married young, got married at 21. I started having kids at 23. So we were young. We were naive. We were trying to lead this church, and we were so young and learning so much, but learning together and loving it. And then he got sick in the fall of 2017. We had been through a lot. His dad had wrestled with leukemia and ultimately passed away from his leukemia journey after a 4-year battle with leukemia. And during that time was when my husband started taking over the church and more responsibilities. And his dad was the lead pastor, so he had passed off that responsibility to Andrew. And I think it all kind of just caught up with him, and he burned out. He started having panic attacks, and then it led to a depression diagnosis, which led to a sabbatical, which led us to looking to doctors and therapists and trying to get answers and trying to help him heal. And we thought he was getting better. We were doing everything we knew to do to help him, and we all thought, me and my family and the team of doctors all thought he was getting better, and he was released to go back to work in August of 2018 and hit the ground running. He wanted to talk about depression. He talked about his panic attacks. He was super vulnerable, really open. God was using him. And then headed into the 3rd weekend, he just had a major mental break, and it was enough for us to see okay, maybe he wasn't ready to go back to work, or maybe he still needs some time to heal, or maybe we need to pursue some other avenues of healing. And so while we were away from him for just a little bit, checking all our boxes, trying to get a guest speaker for Sunday, trying to, figure out what the next steps would be for his healing, we were just away from him for just a little bit, and he attempted suicide. And It was an absolute blindside. I mean, we knew that he was struggling, but we truly didn't understand how bad it really was. And so he was rushed to the hospital. They were able to get his heart to beat again, and God gave us the gift of one last day to lay with him, to pray over him, to play his favorite worship songs, and just be with him and truly just say goodbye. And so on August 25th, 2018, he took his last breath. And with that, I took my first in this life I never saw coming as a widow at 29 years old with 3 little boys who were 2, 4, and 5 years old.
Yeah, I love how you say this, didn't see it coming. And as I know you've shared in other places, as I've been able to listen to some of your story, you did all the things. Meaning you were pursuing medical help and spiritual care. Like you were looking at the holistic care of your husband, and this just wasn't on the radar. I mean, he'd just gone back to work, and yet here you are facing this, not just like the end of dreams, but really like a nightmare scenario. What was the first, in some ways, I'm sure it was just such a fog, but the first few months, as you're trying to find what's up and what's down and what's sideways, what was that like?
Shock. I think you hear about that, about people being in shock. And I was truly in shock. I had no idea what had just hit me. You almost get energized by the shock because it's all new and there's so much happening, and you got to plan a memorial service and you got to make all these decisions. And I still have these 3 little boys that I'm raising day in and day out. So the first few months, shock. And my mind just had nowhere to put it. And so the events of what happened would just circulate over and over and over and over and over. My therapist described it as having all these files, just like all these papers just spread all over my mind, and my mind not having a file folder, not having a place to put them. And so, as I healed, my mind came up with some file folders and was able to name and store away some of that, initial trauma. But for the first few months, it was really just like sitting in what in the world just happened? What in the world
Right.
just happened? And oh my gosh, my life as I knew it is gone. So
Yeah.
grappling with like, okay, my life is never going to look the same. And oh my gosh, I have these 3 boys that are looking to me like, what are you going to do, Mom? What are you going to do next? What are you going to do now? And I'm like asking myself, what am I going to do now? I don't know. So it was a lot. And my mind was just like replaying the suicide over and over and over and over and over. And trying to come up with a million different ways in which I could have saved him. So when somebody dies by suicide, there's a lot of regrets. There's a lot of coulda, shoulda, woulda's. And I know for the first like 3, 4, 5, 6 months, I was wrestling with a lot of that, with a lot of what could we have done, or how in the world did this happen? Just a bomb just exploded my life. And whoa, this is like, and nothing, everything is touched. Every
Right.
part of my life, every little bit of my life was touched by death.
Oh, yeah. And I imagine in some ways it's if the metaphor, if I can use like a bomb going off, or even like a nuclear bomb, there's the initial destruction. But then there's all these ripples that come days, weeks, months, years later. Like some of it, here we are, is it 4 years later now?
Yeah, 4 years.
But grief doesn't just go away. What have you learned? What are some of those things? Well, you know what? Before we go there, can you tell us a little bit about Andrew? What was he like? And what, because you're talking about the loss, but what did you lose? Who was he?
Yeah. Oh, Andrew. He was a complicated man, but an amazing, amazing man. We met, goodness, I think I was 19 and he was 20. I was a sophomore in college and he was a junior. And the first initial thing that attracted me to him was that he was driven and passionate and focused. And not a lot of young men are driven and passionate and focused like that. And so that was very attractive. And like, he knew where he was headed and I wanted to go with him. And so he knew he was called to ministry. He knew that, he felt like he was going to do ministry for his entire life. And I mean, he did really. He ended up doing ministry until the day he died. And I like just loved, I'd grown up in the church. And so that to me sounded like, okay, cool. Like I hit the jackpot. He wants to be a pastor. He's a good man. He was very serious, not like a lighthearted, silly, funny guy, more of like a very serious, intentional, more melancholy. He would have been more, introverted than extroverted, which was probably unexpected because he was the lead pastor. He's the guy on stage telling the jokes and being loud and talking into a microphone. But he was more private and more introverted and brilliant. So brilliant. I mean, I remember telling him when we were dating, like, you literally could do anything. Like, you are so smart, and you were like, you had that knack where it's like anything you touch turns to gold. He's like one of those people where it's just like he was going to be successful no matter what he did. And I was just in awe of that. I just thought that was just incredible. And so I loved him. Yeah, he was a great dad, very patient, very kind, very gentle with the boys.
And there's something about his love of candy. I feel like you've told the story about him, like his like midnight snacks.
Yeah, he loved candy. In the middle of the night, I would hear him pouring peanut butter M&Ms onto our comforter. The sound of like pouring M&Ms, and he'd be laying in bed and just like nibbling on the peanut butter M&Ms. Yeah, so he had, quirky, silly things like that the boys and I like laugh about a lot. He loved robes and slippers. He loved to be comfortable. The first thing he would do when he got home from work was the boys would all follow him. They'd all go upstairs and he'd put on his pajamas and his robe and his slippers. And so when he wasn't at work, he wanted to be home and be cozy and be with his family. He loved his family and served his family so well.
And then of course, so much changed when he got sick. He was so unwell for the last period of his life. Um, and can you help us, because you've talked about the difference between the expression "died by suicide" or "committed suicide"? Can
Yeah.
you help us, for those who maybe have older terms for that, help us understand what the difference is and how we should think about suicide?
Yes, that small change in language has been everything for me. I mean, it's been so helpful for me in so many ways. Our words are so powerful. Our words matter. The way we talk about things matters. And I've just learned in my journey, like the way I grieve and the way I heal is modeling for my kids. The way that they grieve and the way that they're going to heal and the way that they're going to look back and have empathy and compassion for their dad. And so even that small change in language can be so, so helpful. When we say the word committed suicide, all it does is heap shame and blame onto the shoulders of the person who died. That word committed is a word we attach to things like committed a crime or committed a sin or committed a murder. Like all it does is heap shame and blame. And so it just points the finger at the person instead of the illness. And so saying the phrase died by suicide instead of committed suicide might seem like a small thing, but it's huge. It's like, I
Yeah.
don't blame anybody for the suicide. I don't blame Andrew. I don't blame the doctors. I don't blame the therapist. I don't blame myself or my family or our friends. Like, I see the suicide as a complete tragedy. I don't even think it was Andrew's fault. I think it was a total tragedy and nobody is to blame. And it's just as tragic as any other tragic accident. I often describe his suicide like a child drowning in a swimming pool at a birthday party. Like, he was literally surrounded by people who loved him, who, if we knew he was drowning, we would have jumped in the water and saved him. We just truly had no idea how bad his pain really was. We had no idea.
I want to pause the conversation with Kayla because, especially in times of grief, struggle, confusion, the Bible can feel overwhelming and add to our confusion. It might even feel hard to believe. Scripture Untangled is a new podcast by the Canadian Bible Society, and it's bringing you interviews with culture leaders, leaders in ministry, and Bible thinkers to help you be inspired to dive into the Bible and understand it. Listen for free and subscribe to Scripture Untangled on your preferred podcast app. Yeah. And of course, that's such a poignant analogy, I think, because if he could have saved himself like a child in a pool, they would have. They didn't want to be there. Everything went not like the way anybody wanted it to go. And so help us understand grief. What have you learned? I mean, I know I've shared some on this podcast about grief in my own life and things in my family. And so I feel in some ways familiar with grief as an idea, as something as I've lived it, I've learned about it. So tell us about what you have learned about grief, because it's probably not what you think it's going to be from the movies.
Yeah, I was explaining to a friend this morning on the phone, I'm coming up on the 4-year anniversary tomorrow, and the next day it's really a 2-day deal for me, the 24th and the 25th. And so I was explaining to her how it's like grief, my pain and my grief is like this living, breathing thing with a mind of its own and a mood of its own. And like, just when I think I've learned how to live with the pain, because that's what grieving is. It's not getting rid of the pain. It's not moving on or beyond the pain. It's like learning how to invite the pain and welcome the pain and embrace the pain and learning how to live with it, because it's something that's going to be a part of my life for the rest of my life, for my life and my boy's life. That awful, terrible, horrific thing that happened where our life was just like split into the life with Andrew and the life without Andrew. That's going to keep moving forward with me for the rest of my life. And it can be at times, like, I think I have a handle on it. I think I've done the work, and I think I've done the hard work of healing, and I've done the therapy, and I've sat with friends, and I've welcomed the pain, and I've read the books, and I've journaled, and I've written 2 books, you think you've done the work, and then the waves just come and take your breath away. Just yesterday morning, I was sitting on my couch and I was just weeping, just missing him, and the thing that I was grieving was a thing that I hadn't grieved yet. It was the loss of a best friend, and I specifically hadn't grieved that yet. And so I think there's just
Mm.
so many layers to grief. And I think the best thing that I've been able to do for my grief has been to give it room to breathe, and just to give it space and to not expect anything from it, to not put expectations on myself, to not force myself
No
into
timeline.
no timeline, not force myself into a feeling. It can be easy to think like on certain days, like tomorrow, like the anniversary days, to feel like I need to feel a certain way. When instead it's just like, you know what, I just need to welcome what is and feel what I need to feel and let my grief lead me in some ways and show me and teach me. My pain has been one of the greatest teachers of my life. It truly has been one of the greatest teachers of my life. And it's opened my eyes to see everything in a new light, in a new way. The way I interact with other people, it's like I had no idea that there were people walking around the grocery store, or sitting on the sidelines of the soccer field that had unseen pain. When you become the person
Right.
with the unseen pain, you realize that everybody's walking around carrying something. And oftentimes you can't see it. It's like the person that's yelling at the cash person at the cash register at the grocery store, or the person that's driving crazy on the freeway. Like, we truly have no idea what anybody else is going through. But when we're handed our own prescription of pain, it really changes the way that we extend grace to other people. And so that's been one of the biggest lessons and gifts to me in my grief. So my pain and my grief is awful, terrible, horrible, wouldn't wish it on anybody, but it's also been one of the most beautiful, incredible teachers of my life.
Wow. Yeah. And I think in many ways, being a younger person going through great pain, I think pain comes for us all at one time or another. I mean, there is pain in life, different amounts of it, different directions of it, but to go through it you can't know it until you go through it. And to go through it at 30, it's like you have the wisdom and experience of someone who's 60, 70, 80, 90 years old in this piece of who you are now. This, as you say, that insight into the compassion you have now for the person on the sidelines of the soccer field, realizing, wow, like what is everybody going through and how are they carrying it? You talk in your book about steps of process, 5 steps of processing your pain. Can you, if you, maybe we don't have time for all of them, but can you talk to us a little bit about, as you write in your latest book, about your sort of lived expertise of going through the process of pain?
Yeah. It has been such a gift to me to be able to write this book. And the title of the book is called Rebuilding Beautiful. And it really, those words came out of a conversation that I had with one of my friends where I was sitting on my front porch swing at the house I used to live before this house. And I was explaining to her how I had this beautiful life. Like I explained to you, I really, truly had everything I could have ever wanted and more. And it's like that whole life died with Andrew, and I was handed this brand new life that I never saw coming. And I deeply wanted to believe that this brand new life could still be beautiful. And then I said these words to her. I said, it's as if I'm rebuilding beautiful. And when I said that, I was like, whoa, this is like, yes, like that's what I'm doing. I'm rebuilding beautiful, and it's going to be a completely different version of beautiful than it was before. It's never going to be the same. It can't ever be the same, but it can still be beautiful. So that hope, it's like that anthem of hope and moving forward for me has been rebuilding beautiful. And it's been cool as I've shared that phrase, other people have adapted it for themselves in their own journey. But as I was writing and dreaming up this book and sitting with, the book proposal and trying to figure out like, how can I explain this process that I've been going through the last 4 years? Like, how can I put words to my journey? And as I was sitting and thinking about it, those 5 processes are kind of what was birthed out of that. And those 5 processes for me have been embrace, heal, explore, dream, and live. And so embrace simply means just embracing our pain, welcoming what is, going to therapy, sitting with friends, embracing community, giving our pain a big, warm hug. And even though it's jagged and it's sharp and it's going to hurt like hell, that's the only way through. There's no way over or around or under. Like the only way through is to embrace it and let the pain work through you. And so the chapters are all little standalone chapters. It was so fun to write. It was so different. And so that's embrace, heals, like doing the hard work of healing and sitting with our trauma. And I have a whole chapter about befriending death. What does it look like to befriend death? What does it look like to welcome death? Because it's one of those things, especially in our Western culture, that we don't like to talk about. I share this conversation that I had with the mom on the sidelines of the soccer field where she was asking me where my husband was. And I was like, oh, he passed away. And she was like, oh, I'm so sorry. And then she literally turned to the girl next to her and so was like, how was your vacation to Mexico? Like we just don't know how to talk about death or embrace death or welcome death. In order to heal, we need to. Embrace, heal, explore. And then explore is just like the fun part, it's like where you start to see that this brand new world that you've entered has something to offer you. It's where you start to step out, where you've gone through the pain, you've gone through some years, you've done some therapy, you've done some hard work of healing, you've sat with other people who've shared your pain with you, and it's been lifted and it's maybe lighter, and you're like able to see like, okay, there's more life ahead of me. My life isn't over. Yes, this person that I loved, or really, it can be for anything. It's like loss of a job or loss of a dream or loss of a career, new season of life, whatever it may be. I think all of us go through rebuilding seasons where life doesn't look the way we thought it was going to look, or there's not the same people in our life that we thought were going to be in our life for the long run. And so the explorer piece is just like the fun piece of it, of rediscovering our identity. For me, it's been, so much of my identity was wrapped up in who Andrew was. And so I've had to sit and ask myself, like, who am I now that he's gone? What are the things that like bring me life? What are the things that I enjoy to do? What are the gifts God's given me? And like exploring those things and being willing to try new things and being willing to fail, at some of those things and succeed at things that might surprise you. For me too, the explore piece has been like actually physically doing stuff. Like I took on skateboarding with my boys.
No way.
Yeah, I'm falling a ton.
Cool.
I am not very good. I've fallen a ton. I have like scars that show my wounds from falling.
Just as a note, just because I just saw it was on Instagram or TikTok, I saw this 31-year-old mom who said, I started skateboarding 8 months ago. And like, she's posting videos of like that learning process of learning a new thing. I don't know the background story on that woman, but I love that like, even like a thing that, oh no, that's for kids. Like, no, like to have the humility to say, I'm going to try a new thing that I might be bad at.
And that's part of the new life. It's like the life that I'm living today is a brand new life, a completely different life than I was living when Andrew was alive. And so part of the new life is like exploring new opportunities and trying new things that I would have maybe never tried before. It's making a fool of yourself sometimes too, when you're at the skate park and you're dropping in and you're falling on your, completely like Superman on the ground and the kids are all laughing at you. Like it's not always going to be fun and it's going to hurt sometimes, but it's been such a journey. And the last two sections are just dream and then live. And dream, of course, is just like, what are those dreams that you have for your life? What are those dreams that are awakening within you? You've done the hard work of healing. You've explored your new world. And now where do you want to go? What are those dreams that God is planting in your heart? What are those seeds that God is planting in your heart? And what are you going to do about it? So taking action on those dreams and trying new things, and pushing through a lot of fear. For me in our story, one of those dreams was to move, and it was the most terrifying thing. I moved 2 years ago, and I had just
moved out of your family home that you had with Andrew.
No, we've moved so many times. I think I've moved probably 11 times in the last 10 years, like a ridiculous amount of times. We had just moved into a new home right before he passed away. It was way too big to handle. So after he passed away, we moved in with a mother-in-law. Then we moved into a different house, and then I had just remodeled and fixed up that house, probably there for a year and a half, but it was still within the same city where we were leading.
I see. I understand.
Where we were leading the church, where we were raising our family. And so I was bumping into my grief everywhere. I mean, I couldn't even go to the grocery store without passing the cemetery. I would pass places we used to go on date night all the time. I would bump into people at the school my boys were going to who used to go to our church. And like, I felt like I was seen as this like sad widow, and I felt like my identity was being formed for me. And I felt like for
Right.
my boys, their story was just going to follow them for the rest of their lives if we kept living there. People were going to be telling their story for them.
And making all kinds of assumptions before you
Yep,
have a proper conversation. How are
exactly.
you doing?
Yeah.
Well, let me and yeah, I can totally appreciate. So you moved like
So we
away.
moved. So I'm like, you know what? We can't live here. And I just felt this
Wow.
stirring in me that like I had reached how far I was able to heal there. Like I had done the work of healing there. It was great to be close to the cemetery when I needed to be close to the cemetery and be there and sit there. It was great to be with that community when we were all grieving together. And I kind of reached the point where I was like, I need the next, what's the next step in my healing journey? And the next step for us, not for everybody, but for us, was to move. And I was terrified. I mean, I really had to push through a lot of fear to walk away from a life that, like, our house was paid off, my boys were going to private school, my dad was up the street, grandma's down the other street, our friends and family are there. And to choose to say, like, this is good and this could work and I could stay here and I could raise my kids here and this could probably be fine. But is this God's best for me? Is this what I feel like is God's best for me? And I just really felt this stirring, like, no, we got to go. And it was during 2020, and so my kids were already pulled out of school anyway. And I'm like, if we're gonna go, like, now is the time to do it. And so we moved to the beach, and it's been one of the most healing, the best thing I could have ever done for me and my kids was to have a fresh start where we get back the power of our story. I gave my boys back the power of their story by moving, and they get to share and I get to share our story on our own terms when we want to, with
Right.
who we want to. It's not being told.
And if you
for
don't want
us.
to, they don't already know it.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Wow.
And then also just like having the outdoor lifestyle that we have here too. Like we're just outside. We're at the beach. My boys are avid skaters, so we're at the skate park all the time. We have made so many friends. We have even more community than we had where we lived before. Like God has just totally blessed us. And we bought this little fixer upper, and so it was fun to write about in the book too. Like we've been fixing up our house together. Me and my boys, we've been knocking out walls and ripping out floors and remodeling the kitchen and remodeling the bathrooms. And I got a collection of power tools now, and they've been able to be part of the process. I have videos of them literally kicking through drywall and pulling out flooring and knocking out tiles. So it's been a really cool metaphor for like we're rebuilding our life and we're literally rebuilding our house. And there's just so many parallels that have been so beautiful.
Yeah.
So it's a lot. The book is a lot of different things. They're all different standalone chapters. But, it's like those 5 things are the things that have been so healing and so helpful for me, like going through each of those processes. And I think it's something that, we're always going to be growing and changing, and we're always, curveballs are going to keep coming. And so it's like, it's not just a one-time thing, and it's not, you're not trying to arrive anywhere. It's like, I'm going to always be rebuilding my life. I'm going to always be rebuilding beautiful. The boys are going to get older. There's going to be different seasons of life. And so, it's just like, this is just all part of the journey.
Pausing the story with Kayla to talk about this idea of transformation. As Kayla's talking about this transformation from the inside out, we see that this word transformation, it can feel like a buzzword, but what does it really look like? Well, one place transformation is so evident is in the stories of former Compassion-sponsored children, graduates or alumni of the Compassion program who are now adults telling their stories of how sponsorship impacted them, like Eric, who was in the program in Uganda. Compassion became a part of Eric's life right when his family needed it most. His father, the family's only breadwinner, had suddenly passed away. Others had taken the rest of their money and they had nothing. Eric describes it this way: you consider yourself a nobody. You have nothing. And then you receive news that someone is coming. This was a life-changing story for Eric. The evidence of his sponsor Dorothy's impact on his life is so evident. They're still in touch today. Child sponsorship transforms lives, and you can find Eric's full story and learn how to sponsor a child yourself at compassion.ca/if-only. The link will be in the show notes. What strikes me as you talk is it sounds like you have multiple full-time jobs. There's the job of mom and single mom, and there's the job of your writing, which is, why we're able to have a conversation today. And then there's this, what I would suggest sounds like more than a full-time job when you're talking about giving space for your grief, doing the work, going to therapy, um, letting things come as they come in terms of decision. And then you're also renovating a house. Maybe that's a whole other job. Uh, I'm not even sure what the question is, but just to comment and maybe validate for other people that it's a lot of work what you're describing.
Yeah.
And I see that you're talking about the fruits of being willing to do the work and not shove it down.
Yeah.
Or not shove it aside, and in sometimes we're forced to deal with it, and other times other types of grief, other types of change we can kind of put off for a while. um I mean, it can feel overwhelming, of course, but I also hear you talking about how at least now you aren't stuck. There is like a forward motion and a momentum. That doesn't mean there aren't bad days
Yep.
or bad moments where you feel stuck. What do I do now? But what do you do to get unstuck? Because there are so many people listening who feel like they've done some work, they see all the work ahead of them that they need to do. They're trying to give space for grief, but it is a full-time job, and they're also just trying to like keep their job or their family intact or whatever they're trying. Like, it is overwhelming to have these unpaid labors that you have to do. So
Yeah.
what would you say to people who feel sort of stuck in the middle of all those jobs?
Yeah, I would say grace upon grace upon grace upon grace to you.
Hmm.
You know, it's a lot. My life is a lot, and the things I just described is a lot. And there are days where it's utterly overwhelming. I mean, even just raising three boys as a single mom is utterly overwhelming. I think, one of the best things that I've been able to do is to create some space to have some time just by myself. One of the biggest gifts I've given myself in the last 4 years has been just a couple times, not a lot. I know it can be hard for people to get away, but to get away for a weekend or for like 2 or 3 days, and maybe you use somebody's cabin, or maybe you go stay in your parents' spare bedroom or whatever, and just like go get quiet for a little bit.
Mm.
Go get quiet. Maybe if even it's at your own house while your kids are at school and you take a day off work, like go get quiet for a little bit and listen to what God's trying to do in your life, and journal and sit and pray and ask God to give you a vision for your life. Like what do you want me to do with this, God? You allowed me to go through this. You allowed this pain to be filtered through your hands. You've given me, this message or this story. Like, what do you have for me? What do you want me to do with this? I don't know what to do, but I trust you. And I pray that you would open up doors and that you would show me, where to go and what's the next move. And I truly believe that you will. And for us,
Mm.
I've just been following God's lead the whole way through. And we are where we are today because I've been walking with God in our healing journey. And I've listened to those like promptings from the Holy Spirit, even when they've scared the snot out of me, like, you need to move. Okay, we'll move, but I'm terrified. Or you need to
Yeah.
write this book. Okay, but what am I even going to write about? Like all these things that you're like, okay, God, I don't know how. I don't know who it's going to involve. I don't know how I'm going to get there, but I feel like you're stirring this new dream or this vision or this new life. Like, help me to figure out how to get there. And I'm
Mm.
just confidently believe He will, because He has in my
Mm.
life. He'll show you the way if you feel like you're stuck.
In this, I'm struck by what you're saying because we're living in this era of deconstruction is the big word, and criticism of the church, some of it very appropriate. There's stuff that should be criticized and
Yeah,
should be torn down to build something different, like maybe to rebuild beautiful in the whole
yeah,
church, if I could say.
yeah,
But in this area for you, around your faith, how has your view of God changed or expanded
yeah.
in the last few years?
Totally expanded. I think that I, as a pastor's wife, young, naive pastor's wife, very proud pastor's wife, thought that I had all the answers. I thought
Mm.
that I needed to be the person that had all the answers. I felt like I needed to be the person that had the strong faith and I really felt like I did. I would literally was up at 4:30 every morning in my Bible, journaling, like before the sun came up. Like it was my world and it was my life. And I was like, I'm gonna, I got this. I got a grip on all of this. And then Andrew died, and I'm like, oh my gosh. Even during the depression journey, I was crying out to God, like, where are you, God? And why are you allowing this? And why aren't you fixing this? And then what? Suicide? Like really? Like we go through this whole journey with depression, and then you're going to end it in suicide? Like seriously? So it's been a wrestle. It's totally been a wrestle with God. But even from the very, very beginning, right after Andrew passed away, it kind of went from where are you, God, in this journey with depression to literally God is everywhere. It felt like it was just like that verse, the Lord is close to the brokenhearted and comforts those who are crushed in spirit. Like he was so close. I felt so close. I had some of my best friends that I was sitting and having coffee with and sharing this season of life with. I remember them saying to me, like, Kayla, I've never seen the hand of God like I've seen the hand of God in your pain. He was just providing for us and taking care of us in little teeny small ways and big massive ways. I mean, little ways that my boys could see and understand. Like the day that I told them their dad died, we sat and colored in this coloring book, me and my oldest son. And the very first page of the coloring book was a life cycle of a caterpillar. So it had a caterpillar and a cocoon and a butterfly, and we're sitting and we're coloring, and it's time for the kids to take a nap. So we put the coloring book away. I go to close the curtains, and right where I put my hands on the curtains is this little tiny green caterpillar. And I don't touch bugs, but I was like, I have to grab this bug. So I grab the caterpillar and I show my son Smith, who I was just coloring with and talking about caterpillars with. And without skipping a beat, he goes, Mom, it's a miracle from God. So like little tiny silly caterpillars to like huge, financial blessings. He died by suicide, so there's no life insurance. He was a pastor, so he opted out of Social Security. So we were not in a good place, and like God just has provided above and beyond in so many ways for us, in huge, huge, huge ways, and in little teeny tiny ways. And so I've just surrendered my plans to him and what I thought my life was going to look like, and I've just been trusting and wrestling along the way. And I honestly, I think what's happened for me in my faith is I went from feeling like I needed to have all the answers to coming to a place where it's like I can actually just sit back in the awe and mystery of it all. Of like, actually, none of us have all the answers. If you have all the answers, like probably not doing it right. Like none of us.
Yeah, you're definitely not doing it right if you have all the answers.
None of us have all the answers. We know just a little. Even the Bible says that. We know just a little. It's like we don't know anything. And so I think for me, the posture in my grief journey has just been kind of sitting back in awe and mystery of it all, and just surrendering over and over and over and over and over again when I don't know what I'm going to do next, or I don't know what it looks like when I moved. I didn't know what that new life was going to look like, or if we were going to be able to afford it. And it's like just surrendering that of like, I feel like this is what you're leading me to, God, and I trust you. I trust you. I trust you. I trust you over and over again. You have been good. You have been faithful. I know that a life with you is better than a life without you. Like, I trust you. I'm in it. I look to you. And he's been so good to us. I mean, really, truly, he has been so good to us and provided for us and taken care of us every step of the way.
I mean, I used to hearing the song "Great Is Thy Faithfulness" playing as you describe how God has been so good. When we think of the church and the people listening who are part of churches, and so they are the church, the institution, and the people. What are some things what can we do, if we're the person listening who isn't in the moment stuck, isn't in the moment of trying to rebuild, we're trying to support others. I'm sure there's some things that like the things you shouldn't say, like the mom at the soccer field who just turns away from you, like right after you share something, like doesn't know what to say, so just stops. What are some ways that you think have been helpful, or that even as you talk to others, maybe who've gone through this, what are some of those things that whether the church, the people, or the church, the institution, can do to support people going through huge grief like this?
Mm-hmm. I think it's staying away from the Christian platitudes, like God's not going to give you more than you can handle. Like some of those silly things that are just not true. Like God absolutely gave me more than I could handle.
So and like not like out of context, quoting out of context. Yeah.
I feel like sometimes we think that we need to have something to say. We think we need to have all the right words. We need to come with an agenda. We need to have the right Bible verses written down. We need to like write a note that's powerful and meaningful and it's going to help and heal and change their life. And it's like, actually, all that I needed in my grief journey was my friend's presence, was just presence. I didn't need the right words. I didn't need the perfect prayer. I didn't need the platitudes. Like all I needed was presence. And there were these moments with my friends, one in particular, the very, very beginning, I'll never forget it because it was just so powerful. At the very beginning of my grief journey, I had just gotten done putting the kids to bed and one of my friends was over and I came out to the living room and I just collapsed on the floor. Just totally just collapsed in grief. I was overwhelmed. Like, how am I going to raise these 3 kids by myself? And totally collapsed on the floor and was just weeping. And my friend came over and she just laid on top of me and held me and wept with me. And that spoke more than any word she could ever say. And so, you know, I think what people need when they're going through hard stuff is presence, and they need presence for the long term. They need your presence a week in, a month in, a year in, and they need your presence 4 years in, 5 years in, 6 years in. Your life may have gone back to normal, but their life will never be the same. And so just remembering your friends that are grieving down the road, just as you loved them and remembered them from the very beginning. And I have friends that have done that for me. That I had 2 friends that called me this morning that were like, I know it's a really hard week. How can we support you and be there with you? And what can we do to serve you? And I think that is one of the most powerful questions we can ask people too that are hurting. Like, what can I do to serve you? How can I serve you? How can I serve your family? And if they don't answer the question, then answer it for them. You know, send a pizza, DoorDash a pizza. Like, it doesn't have to be like complicated. Like when you have little kids, especially, like drop off some groceries. I go through groceries so
Get
fast.
Some Nerf guns.
Yeah, drop off some toys that are going to like entertain the kids for a couple hours. Offer to get the kids from school. I'm never going to turn that down. You know, there's practical ways you can love and support people, and it doesn't always have to be with having all the right things to say.
Reminds me of there's a psychological study where a person has to carry this huge backpack of weight, and they're standing at the bottom of some big hill or mountain that they're expecting. Like they're okay, like you're gonna climb this mountain, and they're asked to estimate how difficult it will be. And, you know, it's going to be very difficult. They've got this huge weight on their back. And then the only thing that the study changes is they get a friend to stand beside them who's going to climb the mountain with them, not carry the bag, just climb with them. And the study showed over and over that the estimate of how difficult the journey and how high the mountain was went down by like more than like not even just half, like it was like 10% of their first guess, because they knew that their friend was going to be beside them the whole time.
I have chills.
And I think that sounds like what you're describing, that when you don't have the words, you can't carry the load all the time, but just the presence of people who loved you, loved your kids, loved Andrew, loved God to be with you. Kayla, if people want to find you, I know you're active on socials and want to find your book. Where do you want to send people today?
Yeah, Instagram is the best place to follow along. My Instagram handle is Kayla Stoeck. My website's kaylastoecklein.com. And the book is available almost everywhere books are sold. You can find it on Amazon. I think it's going to be at Target, Barnes & Noble. So
Kayla, thank you so much, for sharing your story. I can imagine there are days where this feels easy to talk about and days this feels, very difficult to share. So thank you so much for your time and what you're doing as an unexpected advocate for grief, for loss, for suicide prevention. And we're going to leave links to all of that in the show notes as well. If people are struggling, if they know someone who's struggling, we're going to send some resources as well so people can get help and hope. Thank you so much, Kayla.
Thanks for having me. It's been a joy.
Well, thank you so much to Kayla for sharing her story. Next week on the podcast, we have Tyler Stoecklein. He's the pastor of Bridgetown Church in Portland. And you may know the church because he's actually the successor to John Mark Comer and now the lead pastor there. So look forward to diving in with him and his latest book next week. Thank you so much to our sponsors. Compassion Canada is back, lifting children from poverty. The new podcast, Scripture Untangled. You got to go check it out. And Serve HQ. Train your ministry volunteers, leaders, and new members online, fast and easy with Serve HQ. The links to all of our sponsors, all of our resources are down in the show notes. But we'll see you on the YouTube channel. We've got all kinds of back catalogs of podcasts, tutorials coming out every week, and we'd love to catch up with you in the Digital Church Facebook group. If you want to interact, you want to ask questions, maybe you want to find a job, post a job, we'd love to see you there, and see you next week with Tyler Stoecklein.